Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to this MESAS event. We're pleased to have you, and we're really grateful to have all our panelists here as well, and Dr. Meekum. We're going to go ahead and start this meeting with an opening prayer by Josh Brown, and then I will turn the time over to Dr. Meekum to do an introduction.
Heavenly Father, we are very grateful to be here today. I think we're able to have the resources and time to have this lecture. Please help us to take what we can from this panel and apply it to our lives, not only our lives, but to help and serve the lives of others who are in need outside of this community. Lovely Father, we ask you these things in Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Josh. We'll now let Dr. Meekum introduce our panelists and give us an overview. And this meeting is going to run from now until 3. We're going to have we'll have each panelist discuss kind of their specialties and things like that, and we'll open up the last 20 minutes or so for a Q&A. So, Dr. Meekum.
All right, this is something we've been wanting to do for a while, and we have quite a bit of experience now sending BYU students both while they're in school and after they graduate to do some really cool work in Utah with refugees. And one of the coolest things about the kind of work that you're going to hear about today is not only do you get to help people who really need your help, right, in a structured way, and often it's quite hard to just figure that out on your own, exactly who needs the most help and what kind of help they need. This is one avenue to make a difference in the world. But you also get to be in Utah and basically live an international life, like you are essentially working at the UN, even though you're eating at Five Guys or whatever you're doing. So it's a way of taking someone with very international interests who really cares about the world and giving you an opportunity to make a concrete difference in a very international way, including using language skills. And all 4 of our panelists have had cool experiences with that. First, just on my right, Eric Summers is here with us. He's a senior in Middle East Studies and Arabic at BYU. He has worked with refugees for over 5 years in different capacities, including Lutheran Social Services, LDS Charities, and the International Rescue Committee, where he's currently working as an intern on the casework team. And I've had a chance to hear a lot of Eric's stories, and it's been a remarkable experience. Next to Eric is Julia Cox. She's in her final semester at BYU, majoring in health science. She is currently interning with the International Rescue Committee as well as a health promotion intern, where she's responsible for teaching classes to help refugees understand the U.S. healthcare system, which is something I still do not understand. So Julia, way to go. That sounds like a hard job. Gary Crofts is on her right. He's a Middle East Studies and Arabic major here, currently working at a school that caters to refugees in grades 7 to 12. Gary works in an after-school program for students and runs a peer leadership program. This summer he's going to be going to Finland for an internship with a refugee integration program in Finland. And then finally, on his right, Josh Ballack is a graduate of BYU, and he was a Middle East Studies major, currently working with the state of Utah, the Department of Workforce Services, in the Refugee Services Office as an AmeriCorps VISTA volunteer. He works with 12 different refugee communities from Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, assisting with various capacity building events, projects within these communities, and helping local community-based organizations with nonprofit training and grant management. So we're delighted to have them with us. We're going to give each of them just a few minutes to share a little bit about what they do, what they find important about it, and I've also given them some instructions to help you guys think through how to get involved if that's something you'd like to do. So, Eric, time is yours.
Hello, everyone. So I'm with the IRC, as we just heard, and currently I'm a casework intern, but I didn't start doing that. I started teaching English and citizenship classes with the IRC. So what that meant for me when I transferred here in 2013 was on the weekends, on Saturdays from noon to 2, I would teach English to refugees that had just recently entered the country. And so it was in like a workshop setting where me and other volunteers would go, would help them, depending on their level, would help them learn the English that would best prepare them to take the citizenship test. So after 5 years of being in the state, they're eligible to take this exam and to become citizens. And so the entire goal of the English teaching that the IRC does is to help them with that citizenship exam. And so I started doing that. And then I did that for about 1.5 years. And then I left for a study abroad in Jordan to learn Arabic. And then I came back. And so recently, starting in December of last year, I began working specifically with one of the caseworkers there in the Salt Lake office. And so what we do with casework in the IRC is we help the refugee receive all of the services that the IRC provides from entry into the country till what we call their graduation, till we're done offering those services to them. So what that means for me is on a typical day during the week that I go up to Salt Lake, I will welcome refugees into America. I'll be there at the airport, greet them when they come down that escalator, and bring them into their new apartment, and then that's kind of their first day. It's a very simple day. Welcome them and then bring them home. And then that's kind of when the easy part ends and the simple part ends, because what I do with them then is I help them apply for Medicaid, and I help them apply for Social Security, and I help them enroll in English classes, and if they're a kid, I help them apply to school, and we get medical appointments figured out, and we get cultural orientation figured out. All these types of things, I guess, that we do automatically because we've been doing them growing up and living in this country, I help them begin. And so I'm there on day one until the end of the services. And so the thing I guess I want to focus on most with casework with all of you is how easy it was to get involved. I don't have any particularly unique set of hard skills that kind of distinguishes me from anyone else or any other student. All I had was an interest and an availability to commit time, and that's really all that they look for, the IRC especially, is time commitment and interest. With the casework team or with the health team, as you'll hear, or with job outreach, or with any of the other services that they provide, they're looking for time and things like a language, right, or previous experience with refugees, or with a knowledge of health or of the legal system. Those are definitely bonuses, but those aren't necessary for volunteers and for interns. All I did was I applied with the casework supervisor. I knew her from my previous experience, and I just applied, said, hey, I wanted to be a caseworker. She had known me already, and we kind of went through a very simple process of paperwork, and I started the process of casework. So it was really easy for me, and it's been wonderful. It's really meaningful to be the first person, potentially the first American that they see, depending on which refugee camp they're coming from, to be the ambassador of this country to them in that moment and to help them begin a very interesting, very difficult life. They come with nothing except for a bag that contains a few of their important documents and their clothes that they have on the day that they left. That's all that they have. And to take them from that moment to when they are speaking English, or when they have a job and when they're registered for all the things that Utah has decided that they should have, it's an amazing feeling. It's very rewarding, it's very real, it's very tangible, and it's a great way that I've seen to put the theories that I learn in my schoolwork to practice and to see people that I read about in real life. It's amazing. And I'll end there because I know there's questions, and so I don't want to take up time saying things that you don't want to hear. So that's what I do, casework with the IRC. So it's me.
Hi. So I'm also with IRC, but I'm around the corner in the office, and I'm with the health team. And so we, so like was said, so my main responsibility is I teach these health promotion classes. So we go over things like emergency rooms versus urgent care versus family doctor. We teach them who their family doctor is, and we teach them like how to pick up a prescription and all sorts of like basic medical knowledge that is just different in the United States because we have a different system of how we do things and things like that. But then as part of the health team, we kind of all help each other with everything that goes on. And so we help schedule like doctor's appointments for the refugees, and then we're also, we help with what we call like medical transports. So sometimes I like take patients to appointments and then and drive them home. And there's like maternal and child health. And so they help with things like WIC, signing up parents so that they can receive those benefits, and giving like car seat orientations and pregnancy classes and things like that. And we also we help with like tuberculosis medication pickup so that they can make sure that they have follow-up on that. And so basically just like taking care of the basic health needs of individuals. And yeah, and it's been a really rewarding experience for me so far. I've learned a ton. It's so interesting to ask them questions. Like sometimes I ask so what's different about the US healthcare system versus the one where you came from? And so many times people are like, well, you're not mean and this is clean and all these things, and I'm just like, whoa, there are a lot of things that we take for granted here. And yeah, so as far as the health team goes, there's a lot of different opportunities. So I am a health science major, so I do have public health background, but you don't necessarily need that. There's a lot of things that are health related, but aren't really. We have bus orientations to the physician's clinic. So that's connecting them to a health resource. It's not you really need health knowledge to be able to do that. I was able to get my internship. I knew that I needed an internship for winter semester for my major, and I really wanted to be able to work with the refugees, just because this is something that I just feel strongly about. And so I just emailed. There's I wrote down the email address if you want it, but it's volunteer@IRC Salt Lake. Anyways, the volunteer email, and included my resume and cover letter, and just said that I was interested, and they emailed back and was there's a few positions that if you have any interest we can have you interview for. And so I ended up getting this one. I have no language experience at all. I speak some Spanish, but that's not helpful. And so all of the classes that I teach are always with an interpreter, except for when they're late, but then you figure that out. So yeah, so you don't really need to have worry about different things like that, because I do work with all of the different refugees from all of the different areas. So yeah, anyways, that's that.
My name is Gary, and I work for Utah International Charter School, and that's a high school, well, 7th through 12th grade, so junior high and high school, that's specifically for refugees. It's located about 3300 South in South Salt Lake City, just right off of State Street. And what I do, I'm called a prevention specialist. And basically, I work in the after-school program. I also substitute, teach a lot at the school. And the job description is you're supposed to be there, develop relationships with the kids through these programs in the after school, and just make sure that they're having a good life, basically, not getting involved in drugs, and they're acclimatizing well to the new environment and all that kind of thing. So how I got involved, I had a job as a receptionist on campus, and I wanted to have a job that would beef up my resume a little bit more, so I just went on Indeed.com and searched refugee Salt Lake and found a few jobs that came up, and I applied for all of them. And I think because of my Arabic, I got the job at Utah International. And what I've learned since working there is that there's just a huge need for people who have cultural literacy, not just linguistic literacy, but cultural literacy in working with these families, these children. There's so many times where these huge conflicts happen in school or in the family, and they spill into school. One in particular, Arab family with a daughter who's gay, and they just got to the United States 10 months ago, and she's smoking weed, she's drinking, she's stopped wearing hijab, her hair is cut short, and her parents have never seen anything like this, and her parents don't speak English. One day I showed up at work, walked through the front door, and there's an explosion of Arabs arguing, and like 2 neighbors and 3 family members, and plus her parents and an uncle, it's just everybody in this room just arguing in Arabic, and the school administration has no idea what's going on. Clueless. And so not only is the linguistic literacy important at that point, but also the cultural literacy, because how an American school administrator or American policeman is going to deal with this situation is going to be very unfamiliar for these Arab parents who are very concerned about their daughter. And stepped in there at just the right moment. Okay, let's make this feel like home for this family. Let's, kick out the Arab etiquette, the Arab manners, all these cultural customs, and give these parents some security, give the daughter some security, and provide a bridge between this huge cultural gap that's going on in this within this family. So there's just a huge need for that all over, in little situations and in big, really strong situations like that. Things that, I made a list of things that are super accessible if you're interested in any kind of involvement with the refugee community in Salt Lake, whether that be a full-time job or, one Saturday a week or something like that. So I know at my school you can substitute teach. I mean, there were like 0 requirements for me to start substitute teaching. So if after you graduate, you have some time, you don't really have a job, and you're just kind of floating, not knowing what to do with your life, you can go substitute teach for Somali kids, and it's fantastic. Teach music, teach science, they don't care what your qualifications are. So I've taught it all. One that's very easy, you can translate for parent-teacher conferences. I've done this, my Arabic stinks, but I've done this several times, and it's so helpful and so fun, and again, that cultural literacy is also important for these people. And you can do that not only at this school, but any high school in kind of the South Salt Lake, West Valley area. I've seen opportunities to come up and translate for parent-teacher conferences or parent night meetings, any type of where the parents meeting with a counselor, and I'm sure that you can, I know my school has just a list of translators that they can call. And so you can get on any of those lists for pretty much any high school in that area. You can volunteer at the school. You can apply to work as a para-educator. That's just kind of an extra hand, kind of like almost like a teacher's aide, but you're just there in the classroom. You hop from classroom to classroom, helping with kids whose English is really struggling or who have behavioral problems or things like that. Another one is South Salt Lake has something called the Promise program. Mainly it happens through after-school programs at all these community centers. And the goal is to get kids, refugee kids, low-income kids into college. And with this Promise program, they have all different kinds of things. Through the summer, after school, during the school year, even, like real professional jobs where there are people working as family relations experts where their job is to cultivate relationships between these refugee parents and the kids in these after-school programs. I do home visits a lot with the families of the kids who are at our school, and so there are opportunities there. You can apply for any of these after-school program at any of these centers in South Salt Lake, and there are probably more in Salt Lake proper or West Valley. Yeah, so that's just a list of several really easy ways to get your foot in the door or beef up your resume. And yeah, so if you have any questions about that or want more specifics on what exactly I'm doing, feel free to ask some questions.
Okay, so as Dr. Meekum said, I work at the Department of Workforce Services with the Refugee Services Office. And I currently work in a capacity building with 12, 13 different refugee communities. And essentially what that is I help them, kind of along with what everyone else has said, just help them become better able to integrate into the American culture and American society. Whether that is helping them with workshops on English classes or driver's ed classes, citizenship classes. But one of the main things I guess I want to talk about is kind of what Dr. Meekum was really wanting out of this, and as you've seen, is that there's so many different avenues to work with refugees. I mean, you have anything from case management to working with schools and healthcare, and there's, every month there's always a refugee providers meeting, and there's 20, 30 different organizations that work with refugees. There's apartment complexes that work specifically with housing for refugees, which is a big crisis, especially in Salt Lake, to find affordable housing for refugees. English classes, English learning centers, all of these different things. And it just goes to show that there's so many different things, different ways to volunteer or work that you can find. And I would love to talk with any of you afterwards if you have any of those, or if there's any questions, I could address those. I do want to leave time for the questions. But one of the other things is, a lot of times when I tell people I work with refugees, they always assume that I'm working with Syrian refugees, like specifically, because that's what's always in the news right now. That's what everyone assumes, that those are the only refugees in America, in Utah. But in reality, and maybe that was even a perception I had, when I first started working. But like I said, I work with 12 different refugee communities from, most of them are from Africa, and then there's a lot from Southeast Asia and a few from the Middle East. So I work with some Iraqis and with some Syrian refugees. But I mean, because there's such a wide cultural background and diversity, kind of like what Eric said, they're looking for people that have, not even specific language skills. A lot of people assume that just, I got in doing what I'm doing because I could speak Arabic or something like that. I mean, that might have helped, but, that's not, you don't have to speak one of these languages. A lot of these communities come from places where maybe they spoke English or they learned English in refugee camps. There's people from Sierra Leone, from Liberia, where their official languages are English. So, there's tons of different things that you can do to help them. And kind of to echo what they've all said, it's just really satisfying work. Working with refugees, hearing the stories of the things that they've gone through. And one of the things that the director of the Refugee Services Office in Utah always talks about is just how these people are survivors. They learn to survive in their countries, and they moved to refugee camps, grew up in refugee camps in other countries, and because they've grown up always having this survivor mentality, they are so strong and active of providing a good life for their families, seeking education. That's such a huge thing. Trying to provide for their family, and they're always so warm and grateful for any help that they can receive. And we're constantly in the Refugee Services Office, and I'm sure IRC and charter school and all these different organizations are constantly looking for volunteers. And so even if not a full-time job is something that you're looking for, or if it's not your life goal to work with refugees or in the refugee community, there's tons of just service opportunities, which, as a BYU student is something that, we're talked to about constantly, And so just that, in the sense of a volunteer opportunity, is some of the most fulfilling, work that I feel like I've done. And I'm just really glad to be doing it. And yeah, so if y'all have any questions, I guess that's something with that.
Thank you. We're going to move into a bit of a panel Q&A here in just a moment. Just a couple of things, because I have probably less refugee experience than all of you, but I do have a few more years than all the panelists. And so one of the advantages of that is that some of the refugee work that I've done in my past, and have been involved in refugee issues in the past, I actually now can see what happens to these folks 10 years later, right? And can see the trajectory that you've heard about the very early days of that, and how that translates into the impact on their lives in the future. Two quick stories I'll just share with you. One is a young Burmese minority woman that I know named Tatar Yu was found in a refugee camp in Thailand. Her family were professional rebel fighters and fighting the Burmese state for a very long period of time. Once she left her home at the age of 6, she just spent all of her youth and teenage years in a camp, a rebel fighter camp, across the border so that the military couldn't get her. And she was very bright, and some person who was thoughtful and well-intentioned and decided they wanted to make a difference found her in this camp and said, you really need to go to college in the United States. And that was an audacious thing to say because she hadn't been in school since she was 6. So how is she going to get into college, right? And how is she going to compete? But they actually sent her to a homestay in the U.S. when she was 17 or 18. She went to high school and public school. Very challenging experience, just like learning math was a big obstacle. But bright, hardworking, eventually started going to college, went to a very, an elite liberal arts college in the U.S. where I was teaching, showed up in my class, did not have the academic foundations of other people, but she got them. She just worked at it, and became a college graduate, and her life was incredibly changed by the intervention of one person, and then, persistence, both on her part and by those that engage with her in the system. I sometimes teach a little bit about the Sudan, and a documentary film that I enjoy a lot on the lost boys of the Sudan. I showed to a couple of my classes, and it follows the trajectory of these orphans from the Sudanese Civil War that end up going through the process that you've heard described and being integrated into Texas. I think they start in Texas, and it just follows them and how they discover America and a lot of the basic things in the healthcare system and the educational system. And one of these young men, I discovered after having taught this film for a while, had finally made it to college in Vermont where I was teaching. And so I tried to track him down and reach out to him and said, it would be so cool for you to come and talk to my class. And I never heard anything back. And I was teaching one day, and in the window of the classroom, I just saw his face. And he had driven 4 hours, and I had no idea he was even coming. And he just showed up, and his face was looking in the classroom. And so I had a chance to invite him in and be able to teach, a very, very rich set of personal experiences that were very impactful. I was unprepared, I didn't know quite what to do, but I wanted to give him a gift or something for his time, for all this effort he made. And so I pulled off my shelf the autobiography of Nelson Mandela and gave it to him. And that was the best gift anybody could have given him. It was just, that, was a highlight of, this was his idol, right? And he'd never read anything like an autobiography before, and it made a big difference to him. So the cool thing about this is that these are very deeply personal stories, and lives get changed in really quite remarkable ways as they integrate into this country, and as smart, talented, and well-intentioned people like those we've got here decide to put some of their
online homework or homework, that they have to do at home on a computer. And before this, they didn't have access to this. They didn't have a computer. And a lot of times they didn't know where to find the computer. They didn't know you can just go to a local library or something like that. Those are just little things that they don't know. And so just that, being able to provide that, being able to help them was something that was really, really cool.
So the most surprising thing, the most meaningful thing, I think I was super surprised to find out, specifically with the Middle Eastern refugees, how many of them have left their homes, not just because it's a bad situation, but because their family specifically has the choice to leave or stay there and get killed. And many of these children are very troubled. Their lives have been turned upside down, and they need people to talk about it with. And oftentimes it's difficult for them to talk to their own parents because their parents don't quite understand the place that they're in, where they're between two cultures, and it's difficult to talk to regular Americans because Americans have no idea about their culture that they've come from. And so me with an Arab cultural background, you just start pulling out pictures on your phone of when you lived in the Middle East, eating kunafa or eating shawarma, or some of these kids have lived in Amman, where I lived, and you start talking about your favorite hummus shop, and oh yeah, I've been there, and what sports club did you go to? And they start talking, and they realize that, you understand my culture, but you're American too. And they start telling stories of what happened because they feel comfortable telling those stories because you know what Islam is, you know what Daesh is, you know what a Shiite is, you know all these things that are so important to understand if they're going to be able to share with someone who can help them kind of heal. And so just so many of these experiences, just sitting down, kind of getting off on a tangent from the homework that we're supposed to be working on, and hearing about what happened to their uncle, or what happened to their house, or what happened when they left, and just letting them kind of process that is really fulfilling. So.
I guess one of the things that surprised me the most, was talked about is just, that there are these refugees that have come, from all these different countries. There are, we have, Rohingya clients, and, people who speak, Pashto and Dari, and all these things that I've, never even heard of. And I think also just, how long Salt Lake and just the United States in general has been accepting refugees, because I think that with all the Syrian refugee stuff going on, that we don't necessarily think that this is something that's kind of been an established process. And I think another thing that kind of has just that I didn't really expect is just how strong and independent these people are, and just how hardworking they are. Not that I didn't think that they would be, but just they amaze me so much. There's one client that I had that he isn't able to work quite yet because he's working on getting the paperwork and everything, and so he just said that he bikes around for 4 hours every day just so he can understand where things are in Salt Lake, and that just every time I hear something like that from one of the clients, I'm just whoa, that's so awesome. I wish that I was more like you, yeah, and it's just been amazing. And I think that like my most rewarding experiences are just like the little things that I learn about people, and just like to understand different cultures like a little bit more. Like there was one day in the office that one of the members of the health team who was previously a refugee himself was like talking about his kid and how in their culture they don't cut boys' hair until they're 2 years old, and just things like that like are just like really interesting and just like help me to understand people better, and I just really appreciate that, and it gives more meaning to it.
So, very quickly, I think something that consistently amazes me is the dichotomy, the difference between the different refugees that you meet. There will be Burmese or Burmese minority refugees that have lived for decades in a camp, and you have to teach them how to open a car door, or you have to teach them how a box of Kleenex works, how you pull one and then one will just be there the next time, or all these other things that you never think that someone would have to learn actively, right? You think you just pick it up. Or magnets. I was in the office and I saw some Somali adults watch two magnets come together for the first time, and they had no idea what was going on, and so we talked about magnets, right? All these crazy things. And then on the other end, I deal with double PhDs, and I deal with engineers and accountants that are infinitely more brilliant than I would ever be, and they are, intellectually flourishing in their home country, and then they come here and they can't do the thing that they feel is their life passion anymore. It's been robbed from them, and so now they're just trying to make enough money to pay rent. And we struggle as college students, especially those of us that are pursuing humanities degrees. How are we going to pay for what we do? And these people deal with that as well, and they are brilliant people that have proven themselves to be brilliant and to be able to contribute. So that dichotomy is crazy to me, and it happens all the time. And I think one of the most impactful instances that I experienced with being a caseworker was we were moving in a family of Somali Bantu refugees, a big family. I think there was 11 of them, and they had come through Uganda, so they had been in a camp in Uganda for a long time. And that's when they got separated from the grandparents of this family. So the father's mother and father had been sent away years and years and years and years and years prior to when they finally got to leave the camp. And when you're in a situation like that, you don't know, which goodbye will be your last goodbye. Organizations do really well to connect refugees with each other, but sometimes it's so difficult with, the big numbers and where they're coming from and what they can afford and where they get sent, things like that. So they said goodbye to their grandparents and expected to never see them again, and decades went by. And we were resettling them into their tiny little apartment in Salt Lake, and we were in there teaching them how to work the faucet when we just heard screaming, wailing outside, just wailing. And we didn't know what was going on, so we came out, and this family that we had just resettled had been resettled in the apartment next to where their parents were. So, the IRC had nothing to do with that, the UNHCR had nothing to do with that, and IOM, all these other organizations that are in charge of this, had not planned that. It had nothing, there was no, silver lining to that split up, but they were together. And so I was there and I got to witness that, and I got to realize how serious these people's lives are before they come to me. The time in their life when they come to me, it just seems so simple to me that they're in a new country now, and it's good, but so many things happened before, and so many dark things happened before, and so many good things can happen. And so that, I remember that a lot, and I think about that often. That moment was, I think, the most impactful for me so
far. So we've got 15 minutes, and we'll just pass the mic around. We'll collect a few questions and then give folks a chance to respond to the questions that they would like to do that.
Should I say my name?
Sure, please.
All right. I'm Joshua Brown. I'm a Middle Eastern Studies and Arabic major too. I was wondering what you guys plan on doing with your humanities experience in the future. Where do you go from this point on?
Okay, we'll collect a few questions, and if you don't want to answer that one, you can choose not.
I have a couple of questions. Firstly, probably most in the room may know the answer to this, but when there are large refugee camps, who decides who gets to come to America and who stays? What's the selection process like when there are so many refugees and so few that come? My first question. Secondly, I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but in the midst of refugees coming into a Salt Lake culture, is there ever proselyting that's done? Or, I mean, is there ever any interest in the church? I mean, it's such a huge, not only cultural, but then in addition to religious gap there as well. But I kind of wonder if there's ever been any unexpected results that way as well.
We'll take maybe one more and then we'll give some time for some.
So when you go, sorry, I'm a little bit late, so maybe you already said something about this, so if you did, sorry, but when you go and volunteer with refugees in Salt Lake, are you able to kind of decide like which people you want to work with, and are you able to like develop a long-lasting relationship with them? Like, have you kept in touch with people that you've worked with up there?
So let's take, no more than 90 seconds each, and then give us some time for other questions as well.
I'll answer that one. So when I started with the IRC, I was doing English teaching. You might have not been there for that. So I taught English for about a year and a half to specifically Burmese minority refugees, because I had some experience when I lived in the Dakotas. I worked with them. And so because of that background experience, I was able to say, hey, I'm kind of familiar with this culture and this language. If that's of any use, put me where you need me. And so that's kind of how that type of specification will happen based on the things that you're able to do. And if you are interested, these organizations are definitely willing to work with you and help you out. But yeah, some of the Burmese refugees that I worked with a year and a half ago, I still visit with, and some of the refugees from Syria that I've met, I still talk to, even though they're not in my case anymore. But it's kind of it depends on the volunteer opportunity that you take. Some opportunities will have you working with the same refugees, and some just have you kind of switching around pretty often. Yeah. But I mean, afterwards, I can talk to you more about it.
So guys, I guess just in relation to I think I could be wrong on this, but it's UNHCR that does all of the selection process, right?
And IOM.
Oh, and IOM. But yeah, and so one thing that I thought also was pretty crazy
And Josh, can you just say what those acronyms mean?
So the UNHCR is the United Nations
High Commissioner for
High
Refugees.
Commissioner of Refugees, yeah. And then IOM, I don't know what that one is.
They're the International Office of Migration.
Organization.
Organization.
Yeah. And so one thing that I guess kind of related to I didn't realize this, of how many refugees there are, that only 1% of refugees end up in what's called, when they come to America, is third country resettlement, which I think is nuts, 1%, and just the United States takes in 70,000 a year, and other European countries take in some, and that's only 1% of all the refugees in the world. But in relation to, proselyting and stuff like that, I don't know if what the direct proselytory process or whatever has gone through, but I definitely have met tons of refugees from various communities that have now joined the church and are members of the church, and so that definitely happens.
So in terms of what I want to do with my humanities degree, or my MESA degree, I'm looking at grad programs in conflict resolution, specifically religious conflict. And then with the proselytization, there's a whole branch in Salt Lake that's a Nepali-speaking branch that's all refugees. There's a Swahili-speaking branch that's all refugees. So there are lots of, I've never heard of a Muslim conversion, but plenty of other kinds.
Other questions? I know, Ben, you had one.
So I was interested, I know Gary mentioned the need for cultural literacy in terms of establishing relationships and being beneficial to refugees while you're serving them. And I was just kind of wondering if you guys could expand on that in terms of things you've learned on things to do or things not to do when interacting with refugees. Just kind of lessons you've learned on building those relationships.
Do we have any other questions? Want to get in this round? Okay?
For example, what would you want to do when you saw that scene at the school of the Arab family arguing? And what would you want us to not do? If I'm
Well,
just
I can tell you what I would not want the school administration to do.
Okay.
So there was some alleged abuse. The girl was saying that her father beat her, which may or may not have been true, but she obviously wasn't bruised or, injured a great deal. And the police had been called last night, and it was a very delicate cultural situation, because this dad is coming from a culture where that's what you're supposed to do. You've got a daughter, she's drinking, she's smoking pot, she's got some major issues, and in Iraqi society, children get beat. And yeah, is that acceptable in our society? No. But does it mean that he's looking at this in Iraqi terms? In Iraq, would he be an abusive father? Would he be considered a bad father in Iraq? No, he's actually a great father in Iraq, because I talked to him and I saw the tears in his eyes and the concern for his daughter. And so the bad thing to do would be to separate this girl from her family and put her in a protective, center, which was being talked about. There just needs to be some communication, letting the dad know how the daughter is seeing this. She's in an American school. She thinks this is abuse. And it's important that the dad and the parents are understood, that their story is told, because they don't speak English, and the only one that can speak English is the daughter, and who knows if she's telling the truth. So there just needs to be lots of cultural understanding and things like that for success to happen. Yeah.
Did you have something?
You're good.
Okay. Just kind of, I guess, in relation to what Gary said, just like open communication. So recently we had like the public safety, we had all the refugee leaders of these different communities come by, and we had police officers and FBI agents and stuff like that just talk with these refugee communities. And so I think a big thing is you can advocate for more of communication between different cultures, different divisions in the government of people who work with refugees. So just the communication between refugee leaders and communities with police officers was huge. And there were so many things that police officers, they may not have interacted with refugees very much. And just the things that they were able to learn, I think, the fact that our organization was able to set something up like that was, it's super beneficial. Just for an example, one of the refugees talked about how, he got in really big trouble when he first came here because, a police officer tried to pull him over by flashing his lights and, tailing him, but he kept dodging the police officer, because where he comes from, lights doesn't mean pull over, it means get out of the way. So he kept trying to get out of the way, and this police officer keeps following him. And eventually, is honking at him and stops him after, he says, 10, 15 minutes of driving. So this cop probably thinks he's running away. And at first he got in big trouble, but then, it was basically just a cultural, he didn't understand that means stop. The cop doesn't understand that he's a refugee, that he's not used to that. So I think just being able to advocate for more, interaction between intercultural interaction, intercommunity interaction is something that, we can do, or you can do as a volunteer to, get involved in organizations that are doing those things.
So I haven't had necessarily too much experience with this, but I know one thing is that, so IRC mostly schedules medical appointments for the refugees, but then there's this one clinic that wanted to try and help us, so they took on some of our refugees to try and schedule their medical appointments, but then I was supposed to report if there was any complaints about them, and the one complaint that I got was that this husband was extremely concerned because his wife was assigned to a male gynecologist, and he was super offended. And so I just understanding little things like that that is not okay, is just a big thing. And also in a lot of the classes that I teach, we get like the couples coming in, and usually the male has like a pretty decent understanding of English and is able to get around and do things and stuff, and the female of the relationship quite frequently has like extremely limited English skills, if none at all, and like can't read and write. And so that's something that like I've had to learn to deal with, to like help her understand that she also needs to be able to understand how to get around in America. Because a lot of times we'll hear back and they're like, well, my husband does that, and we're like, okay, but there are situations when you need to be able to do this on your own. And so like trying to deal with that without like offending them or pushing any boundaries there, but to be able to empower the females to have some say in their lives as well. It's been interesting.
All right, thanks for your attendance, and please join me in thanking our panelists. I know that some of our panelists are available if you have any specific questions or would like specific contact information or ideas about next steps, so feel free to reach out. Yeah.
So the last thing that I would say is there's a club on campus. It's just barely gotten started. It's called the BYU Refugee Empowerment Club, started by a few really capable and interested students. They are going to be this campus's resource to connect the students with like the community outreach programs and the community resources for helping refugees. So the BYU Refugee Empowerment Club. So find them on Facebook and follow them because they'll help you know everything you need to know and point you in the direction that you're interested in.
And I would also just say that you may have heard of one or two organizations. We've got 3 organizations represented here today, but there are a lot more than that. Josh, I know, and others can really help you think through all the different places you might look if you would like to engage. Okay. Thanks.